I'm Gary Spanovich, founder of the Wholistic Peace Institute, and you're?
Rabbi Arik Ascherman, Director of Torah Tzedek, Torah of Justice.
Great, thank you. And we're just in dialogue here on a number of contemporary topics, and actually the one I'd like to start out with is I've always been a fan of the Old Testament prophet Elijah.
Uh-huh.
And Elijah was the one where the still small voice came to.
Right.
And I've taught about the still small voice for years at a college, Merrillhurst University. Have a book published on the still small voice. And we actually started a church about 3 years ago, Church of the Still Small Voice,
Wow.
focused on sitting in silence for an hour, listening for the still small voice. And so I just in a general question is, does the still small voice, has it ever played a role or a factor in your work, or?
That's also one of my favorite stories in the Bible, for two reasons. First of all, to me, it's a story. Of course, Elijah, he doesn't, just God isn't in all these pyrotechnics. God's not in the fire or the earthquake or the thunder, but God's in a different place, that still small voice. I think that's very, very powerful. Mm-hmm. The second thing is the context. Elijah hears that voice when he's really down. Mm-hmm. He's convinced that he's failed. Mm-hmm. He's feeling really sorry for himself. Mm-hmm. Basically what God says to Elijah in that still small voice is, quit feeling sorry for yourself. You've got work to do. and I think that's a really important and powerful message. We all have our times when we feel that we're sorry for ourselves, that we haven't been successful, that we and it's important to remember. And of course, another part of what God says to Elijah is, don't think you're supposed to do it all yourself. Part of the work you got to do now is go and teach and mentor the person that's going to be your successor. You have to carry on and everything.
So. Right. Good. I'm a student of the still small voice, so whenever I read about a historical figure having heard and talking about the still small voice, I usually buy the book. Usually it's in a book, I read it. Mm-hmm. Martin Luther King talked about hearing the still small voice and having it inspire him, still small voice of the Lord. Mahatma Gandhi talked about it, and I asked his grandson when he came here, did your grandfather, Mahatma Gandhi, ever talk about the still small voice? And Arun said, oh, he talked about it all the time. In fact, he felt it was so important in his life that he devoted one whole day a week to silence, just so he could listen to the still small voice of the Lord. Would you say you've heard the still small voice of the Lord in your life?
I think there have been moments. Yeah. Maybe not often enough, but certainly there have been moments when I felt that something was speaking to me. Sure.
Right. Good. Thank you.
Maybe I need to take some quiet time like that also.
Yes, and that is a part of the process, is the silence. Yeah. Rabbi Sanford, who you know, and who's one of the co-founders of our institute, once actually had an Elijah festival. So he had a whole week that he called the Elijah Festival. And it started with a number of events, and it was not just at his synagogue, but it was also at Catholic Church and other worship places, and it ended up with 100-person choir and symphony singing that part of the Bible where Elijah hears a still small voice. But one thing that I asked the imam and the Catholic priest and the rabbi about the still small voice, and they all said to their faith traditions, it's important. In other words, they all recognize that part of the Bible of Elijah. And so I thought there's a commonality there. You know, all the Abrahamic religions recognize that. So, I guess kind of transitioning a little bit, as you know, we work with Nobel Peace Laureates, and we've always had this dream of having a conference in Israel on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. We feel that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is the taproot of so much of the violence. If somehow you could resolve that conflict, then you kind of cut the taproot of this tree of violence that exists. And boy, it's tough to even get a conference together. We've tried it a number of times, and a number of times we kind of came close, quite frankly. Probably the closest we came was Nobel Peace Laureates gathered in Rome on an annual basis at that point in time, early 2000s. And we were going to have 7 come a day early, and we were going to have new ideas to resolve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict at the University of Rome. But the University of Rome was on strike, and it was on strike for 6 months.
Wow.
And part of that strike was that they had not picked a new president. And then about 2 weeks before a conference, they canceled all events until the strike would end, and they, picked it. So our conference went out the window.
Wow.
So what do you think about that idea of do you think there's anything an NGO like the Institute could do that would be useful in moving that whole process forward, or are we just whistling in the wind, so to speak?
Well, I think that one of our challenges is that perhaps that so many people want to solve this, some people try, and maybe some of the main actors get tired or jaded. I do think, and as you know, I see the key as not being another peace plan, but being psychological. I think that so many studies have shown Israelis and Palestinians saying, we want peace, they don't. And that's why we need a binational psychiatrist who's just going to help people understand that you don't have to wait around, that there are people to talk to, just like when Sadat came to Jerusalem, and public opinion that was the very things they were rejecting a week earlier, now they were in favor of, because now it became real. And when you don't think it's real, you say, I didn't want that, you eat the sour grapes bit. So I think that what I would do with Nobels is I would try to get them to work, maybe not even maybe in a conference, but not necessarily, but using their talents to break through that psychological barrier. If they could use their good offices to get some of the people that aren't making a move because they don't think there's anyone that's going to respond to them, they don't want to take that risk, to take that risk, to take that jump, that could be a game changer.
Mm-hmm. And who would be, like, what people would they approach in order to Netanyahu?
It could be many. It could be Netanyahu. It could be. My fantasy has always been if the foreign ministers of the Arab League would announce tomorrow, you've been ignoring our peace proposal for too long. We're coming to Jerusalem next week. We're not going to take no for an answer. It's time to solve this. And it's not that I think that their proposal is perfect, or that means that just as it's written right now, that's going to be the solution. But there's the principle to do a Sadat-like action. I'm coming. It's time to finish this. Let's do it. And it takes, whether it be an Israeli leader like Netanyahu, whether it be on the Arab side, Palestinian side, that's what it takes. It takes someone to break through the cynicism, to help people. The still small voice that people need to hear is the part of them that says, I want peace, and is being shouted out by the voices that it was being ignored because people just think it can't happen.
Yeah. No confidence. Yeah. And do you think the Arab League's peace plan or peace proposal is a decent one? That would be a place to start?
I think it's a place to start. In other words, I think it's a huge mistake. There's a lot of people out there say, this is the solution, and anything else is a disaster.
Yeah, I see.
And I don't go for that.
It's not any one thing.
I think it's a process.
Yeah.
The process, which is much more important. There's any number of workable plans out there, if there was the will to carry them out. And therefore, a process has to be created whereby the sides sit down and talk without pressure and coercion going on underneath the table. Sometimes you can be sitting around the table and there's all that stuff going on underneath the table. And I think just about anything that they would agree on would be fine with me. And the fact that they agreed on it would make it more doable. A couple caveats. First of all, we saw that after Rabin, Peres, and Arafat signed the Oslo Accords, neither side fulfilled their obligations. Neither side did what they said they would do. And neither side, it's not clear, either they didn't have the will or the ability to market that entirely to their own constituents. That's a longer story. But that's why we talk about a just peace and a viable peace. All too often people sign a piece of paper just to say they signed a piece of paper, but it has to have some of the elements that will make it marketable. And people have to feel that their basic needs are being met. The other caveat is one of our former prime ministers, Yitzhak Shamir, he was prime minister during the Madrid process, then lost an election. And in a rare moment of honesty, he said, too bad, my plan was to keep on talking and talking and talking and talking about populating the occupied territories. To people would wake up when they realized there was nothing left to talk about. And I'm not sure, for example, when we see the dance going on all the time, our prime minister says, let's sit down without any preconditions. And the Palestinians say no. No one's ever told me this, but I suspect that the reason is they understand that this, or see this as a ploy similar to Shamir's. And they say there has to be preconditions. There has to be some statement of intent before we start, so that we know where we're going, and not just a cover for when we don't believe Israel has, or the current Israeli leadership has any true interest in coming to any kind of agreement. So again, it's that mutual distrust. But that's what needs to happen. So it cannot, as much as I want to see this as a negotiated process, the desire that people sit down and talk with each other cannot be a cover for one side or the other continuing to create facts on the ground, even while it seems like they're talking in this kind of thing.
Right, insincerity. Yeah.
Right. So,
do you think the current Israeli government is sincere about peace, or do they don't have any need for peace at this point?
everybody wants peace. Depends what you mean by peace, though.
Yeah, on the ground.
So I think in our current government, we have those that think that we should be annexing Area C, which is 60% of the West Bank. Others who would even annex all of it. Others who may have some different ideas. I'm not, again, I think much of our leadership has been doing or wanting to do what Shamir said more openly.
I get it.
But the thing is, if you're waiting around for people that you just know are really sincere, then you're going to be waiting forever.
Right.
And sometimes you have to plunge in. But so, and a basic tenet of Judaism is that people can change in all kinds of ways and all kinds of reasons. The fact that I'm not convinced that our Prime Minister at the moment, Netanyahu, really is interested in any kind of a just and viable peace doesn't mean that something won't change tomorrow.
Right.
I mean, so.
Right. And do you feel, same question, you might comment on the Palestinian leadership. Do you think they're interested in peace? I've always kind of felt that the longer they wait, the harder it's going to be for them to get something that they can live with. That they're almost better off, and this is just my opinion, they're almost better off taking the deal that's on the table now and moving forward.
Some have suggested I can't speak for them any more than I can really speak for Israeli leadership.
Sure.
I think that there are many who would say that even when they signed the Oslo Accords, they weren't sincere. And certainly it's true that in the same way the Israeli side just kept on creating facts on the ground, the Palestinian Authority was unwilling or unable to stop terror. Excuse me, and it seems really questionable. I do believe, actually, that Yasser Arafat and the people around him actually did want to get to peace. Again, they had pressures on them. There were Palestinians who thought that they were selling out. They had red lines. But I think there was something genuine there.
Right.
I think there was something genuine on the part of Yitzhak Rabin. May his memory be for a blessing.
Good. I think perhaps that's a really good idea, that to begin to work with the Nobel specifically on the Arab League's peace plan and kind of start a dialogue. We already have a dialogue with the Nobels, but
right.
to encourage the Nobels to have a dialogue with the Arab League on their peace plan to try and, that's a place to start.
Right.
That's kind of an innovative idea, creative idea I hadn't thought of. I've always been focused on a conference, but maybe that's the way to get to a conference
Right.
eventually.
And the focus is not on the plan. It's what is necessary is someone from one side or the other who is going to break through the ice.
Catalyst.
To a Sadat-like action that breaks through the cynicism and that gets people in touch with that still small voice saying, this is really my deepest hope and prayer, this is what I really want, and that it could happen. That's what has to happen. And it could be the Arab League, it could be somebody else, but it has to be something from the Israeli side. It has to be doing something that says to all the naysayers, all the doubters, all the people that have done the sour grapes and convinced themselves it ain't going to happen, and therefore I don't really want it. Never did want it. Yes, I want it.
Yeah.
Yes, I believe in this.
Mm-hmm.
That is what has to happen. Whether it can be the leaders of the Arab League or somebody else who could do something like that, to say, all right, I'm here, I'm standing, we're going to do this now.
Lily Holt, please come to the office. Lily Holt to the office, please.
And I guess one of the reasons why I like the idea about the Arab League is I go back on my mind about 10 or 12 years, and I had occasion to, at a luncheon at the United Nations, give a speech to about 30 UN ambassadors. It was a kind of a private affair. Right after the speech, I had a number of them come up to me and say, this work you do with Nobels, we think that's great. We're really interested in that. But the one who came up first and was the most enthusiastic was the UN ambassador to the Arab League. He really liked that.
Sure, why not?
So when you say that, suggest it, I spark in my mind going back that amount of years and think, oh, that'd be it's a starting place.
It needs courage. I've even seen recently, on a much smaller scale, as we've tried to be saving this village of Khan al-Akhmar, where neither side wanted to say they were prepared to accept some kind of a compromise, take the risk that the other side would say no.
Yeah.
Without a doubt. Well, actually, there may be a doubt. I do wonder what pre-assurances Sadat may have had that if he made his announcement, that it wouldn't be rejected. Around the anniversary of his announcement a few months ago, there was commentary on the fact that, in fact, he even surprised a lot of his own advisors, that he did make in some ways, a very spontaneous decision. Often the way international diplomacy happens is things have already been agreed upon before you actually announce that you're doing anything. So you won't lose face. You won't. So it does require someone who's willing
To take a chance.
To take a chance, to lose face. If you could already have a negotiation in advance that the other side would accept the offer to meet or whatever, so be it. Great, but that might not happen, and that's why we need the people that are just going to say, do something which, as I said, breaks through the cynicism and the doubting and the sour grapes.
And I can think of two Nobel Peace Laureates who did that. One was President Kim Dae-jung with his sunshine policy, a presidential policy based on forgiveness in Aesop's fable. Went to North Korea and really took war off the table for 10 years with that sunshine policy. Came back, but took it off the table for 10 years at least. And de Klerk, President de Klerk, who won with Nelson Mandela, and I asked him, why did you have a change of heart? And he goes, I just woke up one day and I knew it was the right thing to do. And that was it. And being we're doing this interview in a middle school, it makes me think of all the middle school dances where do you ask her to dance?
Right, exactly. That's it. That's exactly the thing. Yeah, there you go.
That's a human psychological thing that we're all bound by.
Right.
Yeah. Do we take a chance?
No one wants to get rejected.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you for everything that you do.
Oh, appreciate it. Thank you for you. Good.